My name is Carson, and this is On Air with Heritage Action, a podcast built for conservatives. Twice a week, we break down some of the most important issues facing our country and talk about how you can get involved today in the fight for conservative values. Today, we're joined by David Ditch, a policy analyst from the Heritage Foundation's Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget, and he's here to give us an update on reconciliation. David, thank you so much for being here today. So, of course, over the last few days, we've seen Senator Sinema start to signal her support for this package. Can you talk a little bit about what's in the bill now? And as it stands, it might change a little bit, but what do we expect to come out of it, and how much do we expect it to cost?
The broad outlines are, number one, you have hundreds of billions of dollars in spending on quote-unquote green energy. The effect that this will have on the environment is essentially immeasurably small, especially in the context of what countries like China and India are putting into the atmosphere. It would also extend some of the Obamacare insurance subsidies, but only for a few years. And that's an important part of understanding what's going on here. It doesn't just spend hundreds of billions of dollars. It also sets up more spending in the future. Democrats are absolutely not going to stand for having the Obamacare subsidies just disappear in a couple of years. They are going to look to continue it. At the same time, this bill also includes about $800 billion in tax hikes. Those tax increases are over 10 years. This is, when I talk about gimmicks, a year ago, Senator Manchin was complaining about how the early versions of Build Back Better would often have 10 years of tax increases, but only 2, 3, 4 years of spending, which is dishonest accounting. But somehow now he's fine with that approach when it comes to this new bill.
Right. And I want to dive into the tax hikes for Americans a little bit. So, of course, the Democrats were always saying that this is never going to hike taxes for those making under $400,000 a year. Now we know that, not only below $400,000 a year, it's going to be really for everybody. Nearly every tax bracket is going to see an increase. Can you talk a little bit about how that works and what, most Americans can expect when they file their taxes next?
So there's a few different ways that they're trying to raise revenue in this bill. One of them is they are hiring an army of IRS agents. And while the left would have us believe that the only people who are going to get hit with audits are millionaires and billionaires, the IRS already throws out a lot of audits on people who make a lot of money because that's where the money is. At the margins, they're much more likely to audit middle and even lower income households. And people might think, why would the IRS even bother auditing a lower income household? And it's because so oftentimes you have effects related to federal benefit programs, related to tax credits, and people on the lower end of the income spectrum, sometimes they're making mistakes, a lot of times unwittingly because of the complexity of the tax code. And it can be very easy for the IRS to come in and say, oh, you wrongly claimed this deduction or these number of dependents. You owe us thousands of dollars. So a lot of people are going to get hit with audits across the income spectrum. And then you have these business taxes. And again, the narrative of the left is that when you tax businesses, the only people who are getting taxed are millionaires and billionaires. The reality is the taxes filter through, not just to the owners of businesses, many of whom are in the middle class when you're talking about small businesses. You're also talking about shareholders, anyone who has a 401k, people who have pension plan benefits that are tied up in stocks, they're going to get hit. You're talking about workers who are going to be facing, or going to be receiving lower wages because the business is going to have less money because of the increased taxes. You have the customers are even going to have indirect effects because, again, when businesses are having to send bigger checks to Uncle Sam, that means they might need to raise prices a little bit. So the pain gets spread out quite a bit.
Right. And so, of course, Sinema has been, holding up this process for a long time. But they agreed to some changes in the legislation, right? To have her more comfortable signing on to this. What were those changes that they were negotiating with her?
The changes are frankly very minimal. It's trading one of the smaller tax increases for another of the smaller tax increases. Frankly, it's difficult for me to understand why she was, why the one is better than the other. The bottom line is that the bill is substantially the same. It's going to have roughly the same effect in terms of there's no change whatsoever in the spending. She didn't moderate that at all. It's still going to be extracting the same amount of revenue from the private sector, and it's still going to have the same devastating effect on investment and jobs.
Right. And that's what's been so interesting to me is that the Democrats have taken this narrative and almost, turned it into some sort of argument that this bill is moderate compared to the first version that they put forth like a year ago, or Sinema trying to say, well, I got changes that are going to benefit America's and Arizona's families, businesses, manufacturers. But none of that's really true. This is by no measure moderate.
No.
And of course, this is happening all as we're entering a recession. Can you talk about how the long-term impacts of this bill might affect a recession in America?
It's important to look at both the short and the long-term effects of this bill. So in the short term, they are claiming this is going to have some sort of effect on inflation. Independent analysis from the Penn Wharton Business School and from the Congressional Budget Office says that it will have no meaningful effect on inflation at any point. But specifically, what Senator Manchin is saying is that because they raise taxes by a larger amount than they increase spending, again, on paper, that's when you include the gimmicks they have, they're saying that by reducing the deficit, you lower inflation. The thing is, the deficit reduction, based on the Congressional Budget Office analysis, is taking place in the last 5 years of the bill. We need deficit reduction right now, and preferably we need deficit reduction that focuses on reducing spending. One of the most insidious parts of this bill is that the tax increases they have for businesses, especially the corporate minimum tax, are absolutely going to hammer manufacturing. What we need right now is a manufacturing boom. We need more goods being produced because right now we have a supply crunch, and that supply crunch is part of why the price of things, the value of things is going up so quickly. If you're hurting manufacturing, you're going to get less production, which is inflationary. Another long-term effect is they're implementing price controls on a variety of medications through the Medicare system, and it's been estimated that there will be a significant reduction in the number of new pharmaceutical products that are going to be coming to market over the next few years, which is going to result in a loss of millions of life years that would be otherwise saved. So you're not just talking about financial costs of this bill, you're also talking about a very real human toll to this legislation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's not just about this green new energy stuff. There's healthcare provisions. It's really going to change like our country's trajectory for a really long time. And of course, too, the Democrats are calling it the Inflation Reduction Act, which is pretty interesting and obviously very ironic, but not surprising given the fact that they're also trying to redefine recession. Can you talk about, I guess, the bill from a procedural standpoint? We've heard a lot of terms being thrown around. Looks like the Senate will take action soon, but now everyone's talking about something called a bird bath. Can you talk about what's going on now and what a bird bath is, I guess?
Yeah, sure. I had an opportunity to work for the Senate Budget Committee a few years ago, so I got to watch this play out firsthand. So when Congress produces a budget resolution, one of the things that they're able to do is include what are called instructions for legislation. Essentially, you're saying that we are going to do some changes to fiscal policy, and these instructions allow legislation to pass the Senate with only 50 votes rather than the usual 60, but they have to follow certain guidelines. So, for example, provisions in legislation need to be primarily about affecting taxes and spending. You can't, for example, have a provision to say we're going to ban guns in a budgetary bill. And so there's a process that's called the Byrd Bath, named after the former Senator Byrd of West Virginia, where the Senate parliamentarian goes through and rules on whether she believes that the provisions in the bill all pass muster. For example, last year, the Democrats wanted reconciliation instructions that would allow for federal minimum wage of $15 an hour. The parliamentarian ruled that that was not kosher, and it ended up being scrapped. It's unclear how she's going to rule on these items and how her rulings would potentially affect the bill. It is possible for the Senate to sort of ignore her counsel, but I believe it's unlikely that they would, because I frankly think it would look to the American people like they're cheating the system if they did that.
Right. Absolutely. Well, we'll watch and see what happens with reconciliation and this so-called Inflation Reduction Act, not so reduction. But thank you, David, for coming on. You've written extensively on this, and so has the rest of the Heritage Foundation. Where can our viewers and listeners learn more?
You can find analysis on heritage.org and at thedailysignal.com.
Perfect. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for another episode of On Air with Heritage Action. Thank you for tuning in. If you like what you heard in today's episode, please click the follow button. If you want to receive a text message each time a new episode airs, text podcast to 51776 and you'll never miss an episode. That's podcast to 51776. Hi, it's me again, and we need your help. If you like the insights and activist resources we are providing, please take 1 minute and help us spread the word. Share this episode with friends and family on social media, email, or text. We need everyone's help in the fight to hold Washington accountable. And don't forget, you are also able to subscribe and listen to episodes on your smartphone. Just open up your favorite podcast app and search for On Air with Heritage Action. Click subscribe and download episodes so that you can take them with you on the go. It's the best way to make sure you never miss a thing. Thanks.